I prepared this presentation to give to one of my music education classes this fall. The class is called Teaching Secondary Instrumental Music, and I really wanted to be able to incorporate some of the things we learned this semester into that particular class, because one of the areas I've noticed my students have trouble with in their student teaching is this idea of applying musical ideas with what they've learned about special education, about students with special needs in their class from the School of Education. So I just wanted to help make some transfer, and the first few slides of this presentation are specifically aimed at doing that. The last few slides will cover the particular case study of one of the students that I had for many years in my own teaching. So first of all, I'd like to go over the 6 disability domains. Of course, you all are familiar with that, but what I tried to do is just kind of condense some of the main concerns for each of these areas into a short sentence, and that I could go over in more detail with my students. So for the communication domain, I just said this is difficulty using language to receive information and express thoughts. Cognitive domain, difficulty receiving, storing, retrieving, and using knowledge. The behavioral domain, a lack of social and coping skills resulting in inappropriate responses. The emotional domain, a lack of strategies for how and when to express or control emotion. The sensory domain, difficulties related to sensory input or output. And the physical domain, a lack of physical independence, coordination, or health that impedes learning. So after rereading through some of the sections in the textbooks for our course, I just tried to get the key ideas here in a simple, straightforward, easy way to present to my students. One of the next group of ideas that we've talked about a lot this semester, the idea of adaptations, accommodations, and modifications. And for a while I kind of had trouble separating these in my mind. They seem to be used interchangeably a little bit among different people that I was observing. So mostly for my own sake, I tried to again come up with succinct definitions and that I could use as opportunities to start getting these ideas clear in my own students' minds. First of all, the idea many students with special needs can meet class objectives with some extra help. And that's where our adaptations come in, and also our accommodations. Adaptations, I just said, are changes to the materials and teaching style that result in a fairer learning and assessment experience for students with special needs. So here we're talking about individualizing instruction. Then the accommodations are changes to the classroom or rehearsal space which allow students with special needs to succeed. This is more individualization of the physical space and the structure of the physical classroom itself. Then for those who will not be able to meet the objectives as stated, we have modifications. Modifications are changes to the objectives that meet the student with special needs at their own level and allow them to progress at their own pace. One of the key ideas here being we have to have each of the steps before and after what we're teaching the majority of the class clear in our mind so that we can modify instruction to the level of all of those with special needs in our class, as well as just each of our individual students. That's one of the things I appreciate about the music learning theory instruction I had, was it helped me in the areas of tonality and meter to specifically to be able to kind of get a picture of the step-by-step process that we learn those things. Then one of the other key ideas we covered this semester was specific effective teaching practices as we make the adaptations, as we make the modifications to instruction and to assessment. So the 4 teaching practices to consider when adapting or modifying curriculum and assessments. First of all, size, and to me this is the question of how large or how much. We can make visual stimuli such as music notation larger, so physically making things larger. We can also adjust the content an individual is required to learn, and often this is making either a smaller amount of content or maybe just refocusing objectives so that there are less objectives that we're concerned with, especially in an assessment. The idea of color, what should my students notice? We can highlight information to draw attention or to gain our students' interest. And we can also color code pitches, rhythms, dynamic markings, phrases, or other musical symbols. As our students get older, we can allow them to do both of these things to kind of give them ownership of this process according to what they need. Also, the idea of transparency is placed on top of music helps to soften the black and white contrast. And we can also use that same idea when we create visuals to display. Instead of just displaying them all in black and white, we can have them color coded with a easier to see background and less contrast. The idea of pacing, how fast? So some students can proceed quickly, others need to proceed more slowly. Again, we tend to teach to the middle of the class, but we need to prepare for helping those at either end of the spectrum as well. Some students need to perform in chunks instead of all at once. So maybe we can have them perform a phrase at a time instead of a piece. Or we can have them, again, perform with less objectives at once than maybe the rest of the class is doing. Or on the other end, more objectives, or a larger section if they need a challenge. And then modality. How do my students learn best? We introduce and assess visually, orally, and kinesthetically. Students may have a preferred modality, but multimodal instruction is best, and research has shown that over the last number of years. So now let's get to the specific case study that I'm going to present today. Lane is the name of the student that I'll be talking about, and the name we'll use anyway. And Lane was a student that I actually had for a number of years. I taught in a private school setting, and I was the music teacher at our school. Taught K through 12 general music, band, choir, percussion, music electives, whatever there was. I was able to do that with the students and had a great time doing that. So Lane came to us in second grade and actually continued with us through his sophomore year. And after that he kind of reached the limit of what we could do to help him, and he went on to I believe to get a job. He was older than his grade already, and he was 19 at that point. So he had some many strengths. If we think of his characteristics, he was enthusiastic, fearless, quick to volunteer, which a teacher always loves. He loved sports. He loved music. He was physically coordinated, especially with large motor skills. Little bit less with the fine motor skills. But one particular thing of interest to me was he was above average with his music aptitude. And this didn't show up right away when he came as a second grader, but after a few years of instruction, I noticed his music aptitude scores going up, and as he gained some ability to concentrate and understand the task a little better. And by the time he was in high school, he was getting above average scores tonally, rhythmically, and harmonically. So that was one of the really cool things about working with Lane. He did have some struggles academically. He had language difficulties, including a limited vocabulary and trouble forming ideas into words. He also had a number of cognitive difficulties. He had trouble storing and recalling information. He struggled especially with symbol processing, and he struggled with his attention, especially as a younger student. Throughout his time at school, he was a number of grade levels behind, and I think he eventually academically progressed to around a junior high level, and kind of hit his ceiling at that point. But in music, he was able to continue with me in some form for the whole time he was at school. So some of the adaptations, accommodations, and modifications I made for Lane were, first of all, addressing his attention difficulties. I would seat him close to me with easy access. I'd seat him next to a student helper, and often I'd seat him at the end of a row to avoid distractions. These things seem to help. Music reading was especially difficult for Lane with his symbol processing difficulties. And so I would use audiation activities like singing, chanting, and moving to assist his symbol processing deficiencies, and teaching notation from audiation, connecting as many modalities of learning as we could to that process. For his language difficulties, I'd meet with him individually to verbally complete written assignments. He had trouble with written assignments. He could do them, but they would be very cryptic, and often I wasn't quite sure what he was after. So I'd just talk with him, and he'd get his ideas across, and that was what worked the best. And I'd also use simplified instructions with him as necessary, and less instructions at a time, those type of things. For his recall issues, I'd provide fingering charts during band rehearsals. The thing he struggled with the most was remembering his notes and fingerings from day to day, so I'd review note names and fingerings every day in band during individual warm-up and practice time. And then I'd help him write in note names and fingerings as needed. He did pretty well with the reading rhythms. It was the pitches that he struggled with. Talking about now the specific teaching practices, some of the size adjustments I made for him, adjusted the number of measures or number of objectives for performance tests, as I mentioned earlier. I assigned slower moving parts with less pitches in band concerts. So often there was a bass part in young band pieces that he could play, and they would call for less leaps, less quick motions, so he was able to succeed with those to a lot higher degree. Use of color in band, highlight or circle new pitches affected by the key signature, especially as we see in number 62 there, have those highlighted. Writing in rhythms when we learn new rhythm patterns, other musical symbols with colored pencils. I just, in this example, did it with pen, but be good with colored pencils as well. And I particularly like the Tradition of Excellence band method. You can see all the color coding that they have as they're teaching new concepts, and then even off to in the margin there when they're applying the new concepts to a particular piece, they have that color coded as well. In choir, highlighting the bass part as he progressed to the high school years, he became a bass, so highlighting his part in the vocal score so he could easily continue with that and follow that. As far as some pacing adjustments I made, review musical terms and symbols daily. That was helpful for him. Allow repeated performance tests outside of class for a higher grade. That took some pressure pressure off the students in general, and Lane in particular. Reduce the tempo or difficulty of content for performance tests. For instance, sight singing in choir, often I would have him perform for me alone, and I'd have him do something that was a little simpler, but he did get to the point where he could read in duple and triple meter scale-wise passages and sing on pitch with those, so I was very happy with his progress there. And provide software to assist in home practice. The Standard of Excellence band method particularly comes with some software that's really helpful for practicing at home. Also, of course, Smart Music can be used for that. And allow students to participate in music groups at their level. One of the really neat things about our particular school was I had a lot of flexibility in scheduling, and so I could allow students to join and remain in the groups that were at their level. So once Lane, especially in band, kind of was hitting a ceiling in one year, I could have him come back to that group the next year, and then in choir he was able to learn more by ear, so he could sit by a strong singer, and he was able to stay in that the whole time. Modalities, teaching reading through audiation, as we mentioned before, by adding one musical element at a time. And I had a system where we'd reinforce the rhythm reading with rhythm, solfege, and movement, then pitch reading with tonal solfege and singing, and add expressive elements with singing solfege and practicing fingerings. And I do this with all the students, but that was especially helpful for Lane. So I really appreciate these particular resources, and as I look back on my teaching of Lane, I have a lot more ideas now of things I could have done. I was able to figure out some things that helped in the years that I was with him, but just as I think back on my own teaching, he's one of the students that really comes to mind, especially as a student who had more potential in music than in any other area in school, and that was one of the real joys to him throughout his time in school. So I appreciate the diversity and the breadth of, especially in the practical resource guide, many examples of the lesson plans, and I will also be getting a copy of that for our students and helping our students as I supervise them in their student teaching to gain ideas for what to do with their students.